This is Dreamscaper, a game currently in early access that combines elements of roguelite action RPG with almost like a visual novel-esque layer, all about lucid dreaming. You play as a woman named Cassidy, and the whole point is basically to master your lucid dreams, to use this sort of combination between getting to know people in the real life around you and then going to sleep and lucid dreaming your way through adventures to sort of battle your demons and things like that and come out on top, with the relationships you forge in the real world part having various effects on the dreaming part. So that's kind of like the method of meta progression. Instead of collecting hegemony credits or what have you, instead you collect these various sort of representative bits of material and you use those to craft things in the real world, gifts to give other people, and as you give people gifts and talk to them more, you will discover more about them and the things that they like, and they will offer this knowledge to you, which will improve your relationship with them and eventually unlock new stuff for you to find in the dream world. So it's actually a really neat concept because lucid dreaming as a whole is not really something that's explored by video games all that often, and it makes a really good sort of backdrop for a roguelite with the whole, randomly generated permadeath, all that stuff. It all fits together pretty well when we're talking about putting it in the context of being a series of dreams every night. The combat is pretty straightforward but enjoyable. You have a melee weapon and a ranged weapon. The melee weapon will always have a combination of light and heavy attacks, and the attacks also have a sort of rhythm to them. You'll notice that your character flashes white at certain parts in the combo. Exactly when this happens is different for every weapon, but they all do it. And if you're able to hit the combo button in rhythm with that flash, then you will actually do more damage. And this can even be done with the heavy attack as well. You can sort of string a heavy attack at the end of a light attack combo for extra damage if you time it right, which is really fun because it does add a bit of extra layer to the combat by making you sort of try to obey this rhythm, and the fact that it changes with every weapon means that you always have to sort of learn each one, which is pretty cool. And the ranged weapons use ammunition, which is fairly scarce, but not to the point where you can never use it, so you do have to be a bit careful with how you actually utilize the ranged weapons, but they can be a pretty significant advantage for you because of, the ability to hit some pretty scary things from afar is always nice. You also have these things called Lucid Abilities, which are effectively spells, and they can be anything from calling up like a dragon to surge forward and torch everything in front of you, to like creating a big barrier of lightning that strikes anything that gets too close. It's actually pretty creative how a lot of these things work, and there are all sorts of different ones that are pretty satisfying to use. You've also got this Lucid Meter below your health, which is not used for the Lucid Abilities, and in fact is actually used for something called a Lucid Awakening, which basically freezes time. It slows time. It's almost frozen, though. It technically slows it, though, but it just goes very slow. And this is extremely useful, especially for bosses or for those rooms that have some pretty difficult combinations of hard enemies in them, so you can have a bit more breathing room when it comes to actually dealing with the tougher crowds and certain boss patterns and the like. There are also several other slots for equipment. You can get a dodge, which is usually shoes, although it can be a couple of different types of dodge. There are your basic like dodge roll, there are blinks, there are like shadow steps. There's a cool somersault thing, which leads to you pounding the ground where you land and knocking back enemies around where you land, which is pretty cool. So yeah, there are several different forms of dodge. There's also a shield, which is extremely important because things do a lot of damage when they hit you, so being able to guard is really useful. And also there is a parry system, so you can dodge or block attacks and projectiles at just the right time to sort of slow down time for a second and give yourself a bit of an advantage. And if you, of course, parry with the shield at just the right time, then you can deflect attacks. If they're projectiles, they'll go flying back to the source and destroy whatever they hit. And if it's a melee attack, then you can sort of deflect them and have them knocked back a bit and sort of stunned and allow you to attack them freely. And of course, since it is a roguelite, there are of course artifacts, things that you can pick up that have various passive skills that improve what you can do or give you new capabilities, and these are called keepsakes in this case. Because the whole theme of this is around dreaming, all of the things that you find in these dreams are very much influenced by the people that she knows, the events that have happened to her, and things like that. So this is actually one of the coolest parts of it for me. All of the weapons, the ranged weapons, the abilities, and the keepsakes and everything is all based on stuff that would influence you when you're awake. Stuff like pop culture, jokes, like internet references and things, video games, comic books, all sorts of things that your mind could presumably pull some of this stuff from to give you in a dream, which is neat because that's exactly how a dream works. And especially if you were lucid dreaming, you would definitely want to pull from the things that you know in pop culture and the things from video games that you enjoy and all that sort of stuff and actually possess it in the dream, because why not, right? If you can control your own dreams, wield the stuff that of heroes that you enjoy playing and that sort of idea. So I think it's really cool that they actually went through that route and even gave the basic keepsake, like some of the earlier ones like antidepressants, for instance, all the various things that you will actually have found in the real world that will have been a part of this person's life, they actually have some sort of impact in their dreamscape, and it makes sense for them to actually be there. So pretty much the context for all of the things that you find actually has a certain degree of belonging given the nature of the character that you're playing, Cassidy being basically like an outcast nerd, sort of. So obviously she's played lots of video games, read lots of comic books, pop culture is sort of part of her thing. So these references in terms of like the weapons and stuff, they don't feel like haha video games right kind of references that are always a little bit kind of cringy at times. It's more like, it makes sense because, like I said, if you're lucid dreaming, why wouldn't you pull from the video games and comic books and movies and things that you've seen to give yourself the powers of characters that you know and enjoy? So the way that they're presented here isn't like, isn't it funny, it's a reference, guys, laugh. It's more like, this actually makes sense in the context of who this character is. She would have these things because this is the sort of media that she consumes, so it's going to affect her dreams. If you make it through an entire level and beat a boss, you will actually wake up. Well, you wake up if you die as well, but if you make it through an entire level, you'll wake up and have 3 hours on your hands, and this is where the real-world half of the game comes in. You have a certain amount of time, 3 hours if you make it all the way to the boss and beat it, but less time if you die. Depending on how the percentage of the level that you completed before you died will determine how much time you have when you wake up. Basically, it's like if you got a good night's rest or not because you were in the dream long enough to sleep. And you use this time to travel to the various locations around your apartment, it looks like, house, I think it's an apartment. And you just visit other characters, and these characters, you can talk to them. So you can spend 30 minutes to chit-chat with them, which will improve your relationship with them slightly, but more importantly, it will give you clues as to what they like. It'll give you little bits, little insights into their personality. You know, maybe one character is a huge fan of coffee and won't shut up about coffee all the time, so you can guess that this person would appreciate gifts relating to coffee. And maybe one character is always going on about photography, so it's clear that this character is a real big fan of like pictures and things, so if you can actually create some stuff like that and give to them, they will value it more than other people. And this is what you do. You have to go to these locations and talk to these people and use your time wisely, since everything takes time. Visiting a location takes 15 minutes unless it is the bar area, which takes 30 minutes, presumably because it's like in the middle of town, so it takes longer to get there. And chit-chatting with the character also takes 30 minutes. So you have 3 hours, like I mentioned, so there's a certain kind of window, a limited amount of time where you can travel between each of these areas and talk to people and try to just get to know them better to the point where you can make them gifts. The other layer of the game is the crafting. And unlike in most action RPGs, you don't craft stuff for yourself. All of the things that you craft are gifts for these other characters. There are all sorts of different gifts you can make, and if you're able to gather the materials in your dreams, you can bring them back to the real world, don't ask how that works, and make these things. It seems to be, basically the things are like positive emotions represented, like insight and solace and stuff like that. Those are the crafting materials, so presumably she sort of conquers these things in her dreams and then brings that creativity and insight to the real world, allowing her to make things. That's sort of the theme I'm getting from it, which is a pretty neat way to do crafting. But yeah, so you can craft everything from like just photos of like a comic book heroine that you can give to someone who likes comics, up to much fancier stuff like a sort of thrift shop vintage stitched together sweater that someone who really enjoys like thrift shopping would get a big kick out of. There are various tiers of these things, each taking more and more resources, but giving you more and more relationship with the person who actually likes them. And one kind of cool thing about this is it feels a bit more organic because there isn't just one gift for one person. There are all sorts of gifts, and people tend to have similar likes. So you may come across, say, 2 people that enjoy coffee and 2 people that enjoy comics. It's not just like you make one thing for one character and it's only theirs. These gifts can be given to anyone, and you just sort of have to feel out their personalities and figure out what represents what like. And as you get to know them, you'll learn what gifts they like, and you can actually improve your relationship with them. And the cool part about this is when you improve your relationship with them to a certain level, they will go on a conversation. They'll just talk. And this is actually really neat because this is some of the best video game dialogue I've seen in a long time. You'll notice in the background that the characters don't actually have faces. They're almost like wooden caricature dolls or something. But they do, of course, represent the people. And it's kind of amazing how much character and emotion you can give a character with no face, but they managed to do it. Except for Bruce there with his lovely mustache and bowler hat. But yeah, so the conversations that these characters have as you get to know them will actually be really well written. They're not voice acted or anything right now. I'm not sure if they ever plan to add voice acting, but honestly, it doesn't really matter that much because the dialogue itself is very good. And this is why I mentioned it's almost like a sort of visual novel layer, because your goal is to speak to these people and get to know them better in between your dungeon runs. And like I said, the dialogue is just so natural. There's a lot of character to it. There's a lot of charm to the writing in this game. All of these conversations feel like they could actually happen between two people. They don't feel too fantasy or too forced or like a bit stilted and odd. They all feel like natural conversations that could reliably happen between two people just getting to know each other. And each character, of course, very much has their own personality and their own way of seeing things and their own way of helping Cassidy as she gets to know them and speaks to them more. But it all kind of culminates in this thing where you're really interested to know what the next step for that particular character will be, because the characters actually have arcs. They do have stories, and they tell you all sorts of things, and it's actually really just fascinating to sit there and read all the dialogue because it's so good. I actually found myself identifying pretty strongly with several of the characters because the way they tell their stories and the way they say where they come from and things like that, it's really natural sounding, and it speaks to me as someone who's from like a very small town. When one of the characters was speaking about being from a small town and how they actually described their town and how it just didn't have like a local government and all this silly stuff, and it really resonated because the way they described it is exactly how it was for me, and it didn't seem like they were writing this dialogue from a position of not knowing what they were talking about, you know, like writing this dialogue from a position of like a city goer who doesn't really know what it's like in like a more rural area. It was really seriously natural and it felt very genuine, and that's really cool because I don't see, I guess you could call it mundane, you know, because they're not talking about magic or anything. They're just talking in a normal human way that two humans that are just getting to know each other actually would speak. But even though it's a mundane conversation, it still is really, really interesting because it's got so much charm to it and so much personality, and the way that these people actually get to know each other and the stories they tell makes you want to see more. It makes it valuable to actually get to know them more and get more of their story and just see Cassidy interact more with all the people around her because they all have such genuine character and charm to their writing. And then as you speak to them more and more, they will unlock passives. You can equip one of their passives per dungeon run. Actually, you can technically equip it anytime you want to in the waking world, so you can change it after one particular run and going into the next one. And then you can also unlock things like weapons, spells, new keepsakes and artifacts and things, all sorts of stuff from speaking to them. So their words, their stories all influence what she comes up with next to actually populate her dreams with. And as you would probably expect for a setting like this, the enemies and especially the bosses are all representations of inner demons, of negative emotions, of problems holding you back in life, that sort of thing. So it gives the progress through these various dream worlds and against all these various negative enemies a certain kind of meaning, since you're basically battling against the things that are holding you back in life, trying to get through, and then eventually you use the friendships that you've created, you could say. You use the connections that you've made with other people to make yourself stronger and actually push through these problems and eventually end up in a better place. So the theming here is pretty obvious what they're going for, but it's done in a very, very good way, and you don't really see games about anything like this all that often, about lucid dreaming, about connections between people and how they actually can sort of help you in your own personal dark world actually get through it. It's very rarely done this well, with this much subtlety and with this much charm. The game is in early access, although I gotta admit it doesn't really feel like it that much. I haven't so far encountered anything where I thought it's weird that it ends there, or it seems like there should be something there that's clearly unfinished. It actually feels pretty finished right now. They've said that they're already like 2 years of work in on this, so it's not that surprising that it feels very feature complete already. And the things that they're adding are really, they're going for more variety than like adding major new things. It seems like a lot of the stuff that they've spoken about adding are like new items, new weapons, stuff like that. Stuff to help to increase the variety of the game, but the actual main like biomes and the progression and everything, most of that's already there. They are going to add some more story bits, more like smaller skits and more major story bits as well. So that does need some development, but like I said, it already feels quite polished and in a state that is very much worth playing right now. You won't really run into very many walls that feel like, I wish there was something else here, because there's already so much. But as far as all that goes, I think it is extremely worth getting into. If you're a fan of action RPGs, if you're a fan of roguelites, even if you're a fan of like visual novels with some other gameplay elements, like, you know, RPG visual novels and things like that, I think there's something here for a lot of people. And I think if you enjoy that sort of thing, if you enjoy good dialogue, if you enjoy fun like RPG combat, then you'll get something out of it, and it's very much worth delving into. It's only $15 as well in early access right now, which is a pretty fantastic price. So yeah, I'll link you in the description below this video so that you can go and check it out yourself. If you want to get in on the early access campaign, feel free, because there's already quite a lot to do. Considering the pretty enjoyable nature of the weapons and spells and things that's already in the game, I'm excited to see what else it is that they're going to add, and hopefully, you know, maybe some other problems and things that people eventually find can be shored up in the early access, because that's one thing that they're very good for, is community feedback, actually altering the course a little bit to maybe polish some corners the developers didn't quite think of, that sort of thing. So yeah, I think it'll have a very fruitful early access period. It's only going to be in the system for like 6 months or so, because it's already so feature filled. So yeah, check it out. It's really awesome, and I've enjoyed my time with it so far a heck of a lot. That is Dreamscaper. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.